Hello and welcome to my channel where we talk about tips and tricks for teaching elementary music. Okay, let's get started. So for today's video, I want to talk about teaching students who have special needs. Depending on your assignment, where you are as far as your school assignment is concerned, you may have students that have special needs. They may have physical disabilities, they may have autism, they may have emotional disabilities, they may have severe and profound disabilities. There's all sorts of varieties of disabilities that you may run across as you're teaching your students. Although you may see students come to your class with a general education class that have some sort of learning disability, such as dyslexia, the majority of what I'm going to be talking about today is students that are in a self-contained classroom or a residential school or have a severe physical impairment. So let me tell you a little bit about my teaching experience. I taught for probably about 15 years before I had students in my classroom that fell into any one of those categories of a pretty severe physical impairment or autism in a self-contained classroom or a residential school. Up to that point, I had students that certainly had learning difficulties, but they weren't falling into those more severe categories. So round about year 16 or so of my teaching experience, I transferred to a new school, and it was a school that was very small, so I was only at that school for 3 days a week, and then the other 2 days a week I went out to teach at 2 other locations. And that entire year was a huge learning experience for me. It was one that I welcomed. It was challenging, but it was extremely rewarding. So let me explain what I mean. My home school, the school that I was at 3 days a week, which was a regular city public school, had 2 or maybe 3 self-contained autism classes. That means that these students were in a class that was no bigger than 8 students at a time, and there were 2 to 3 adults in there working with them at all times. And their education was extremely specialized to them, and they would come and join general education classes for music, art, and PE. Never having worked with students with autism before, I had a lot to learn, such as they can be triggered by sensory stuff such as loud music. So little things like that I had to learn. Also, students with autism do best with a lot of repetition, much more repetition than I usually do in my classroom. And they are not always going to do what you ask the rest of the class to do. For various reasons, they might be overstimulated at the moment, it might be something that they don't want to do, it might be something that they can't do or don't know how to do or don't feel comfortable doing. So hopefully, when you're in that situation, you have a paraprofessional, somebody who comes with them from their self-contained class, an adult, that will work with the student to encourage them to play that instrument or to do that dance or whatever activity that you're doing at the time. In my district, and I believe it's throughout my state and might even be throughout the country, the general consensus is that self-contained classes will come to resources, specials, extra classes, whatever you want to call us, with their general education counterparts, because that falls under the least restricted environment qualifications of special education, where you want the students to be in the least restrictive. So you want them to interact with students who are in general education, but they need to do their academic work in a self-contained setting. But they do go to lunch in the cafeteria, they do go to assemblies, and they generally come to extra classes like music, art, and PE, or media guidance, or whatever you happen to have at your school. They generally come with a general education class. and that is to fulfill that least restrictive environment qualification. The other reason that they come with general education is scheduling. You really don't have extra room in your schedule to teach your self-contained autism classes by themselves. However, I had an experience once where I had a kindergarten self-contained autism class and I had a general education class kindergarten also, and the combination of the two was just really chaotic, and I was really struggling with classroom management with them, because if some of my students with autism got triggered and were stemming or vocalizing, and then that would trigger my general education kindergarten students who didn't have a lot of classroom management yet either. And so the principal at the time at that school decided that she wanted me to teach them separately. And that was an awesome experience for my students who had autism, that they really got, I was able to really slow things down, take a lot of that extra sensory away from them, do a lot of repetition. And they really, really learned a lot, I felt, in my classroom that year. Although that is my ideal situation, that does not fall under the qualifications for least restrictive environments. So that is not general practice. So when you're teaching a general education class and an autism class together at the same time, you are probably going to focus your lesson to the general education class, because that's going to be the majority of the students. And the paraprofessional that comes with the students who have autism will copy what you're doing and help those students to come along and do what everybody else in the class is doing. They might even modify if they need to. If you know an easy modification already and you can tell the paraprofessional, why don't you have them do this instead, you absolutely should do that. But sometimes you don't know those students well enough to know what they need, especially if it's their first year that you've had them. So the paraprofessional is there to help their students do the lesson with you. Learning how to modify for students who have special needs takes a lot of practice. It takes observation. It takes asking the right questions to the paraeducator or to the actual classroom educator. It takes research sometimes. So if you don't automatically know how to modify for your special education students, that's okay. But please take the time to learn what modifications they may need. So I'm going to interrupt the video that you're watching right now, because while I was editing the video, I realized that I never really talked about how to modify anything for these students. So I'm going to give you a few tips of this. Let me pull up something really quickly. And I'm also going to talk about assessment. How do you assess students who have special needs? So if you look on the screen right here, I have some different rhythm patterns up here. We'll talk about playing first, but I'm going to talk about singing, playing, listening, and moving, choreography, because those would be the 4 areas that I assess in. For my district, I'm required to give grades for singing, for playing, for moving, and for listening. So those are the 4 main topics that I'm going to talk about. So let's just go ahead and look at this first one here. So if you had a class where you've got some general ed students and a self-contained autism class that comes with them, or a self-contained students with physical disabilities or emotional disabilities, whatever that self-contained class is that's coming with the general education class, this was written geared towards the general education students, okay? So let's say you were giving this to, I don't know, 2nd grade. You might have some students, especially in the self-contained class, that want to play the entire rhythm pattern, even though you see I have this one written for tambourine plays here, sticks play here. They may decide to play the entire rhythm pattern with the one instrument. I try not to interrupt that, because my goal with most of my students that are coming from a self-contained class is, are they actually playing the instrument? Are they participating in any way? Okay? And if you're talking about a single class of 45 minutes worth of instruction where you're doing 5 to 7 activities and you're moving as fast as you can, much faster than a lot of students, especially with autism, feel comfortable. The fact that they're participating and not being overwhelmed by sensory overload, or not being overwhelmed by the fact that they had to transition to get there, it's not in their regular room, they don't know some of the students that are in the room with them. If they are participating, that is a win, okay? Now, some of you may have this question, well, if they're just gonna do whatever they wanna do there, how is that promoting music education? It is promoting music education because you're meeting them at their level, okay? So depending on the student, they either A, don't know what this pattern is supposed to look like, might be a cognitive deficit, right? Or B, they may just not want to play the pattern. There may be other situations going on there. So the fact that they're participating, that's like the number one first step. My students who have autism can learn to play this with repetition and do it exactly the way it's written, okay? So you could do something like this in a program. All of my students, regardless of their abilities, are invited to be in one program a year. Of course, the previous pandemic made that a totally different situation. We didn't have any programs last year, and I'm not sure what's going to happen this year. But traditionally, I have all of my students in programs. The fact that this is an ostinato pattern is really helpful to them and the fact that if you're working on a program, and I'll make another video about making programs at some point, you have worked on this song over and over again throughout several class times leading up to the program. So the students feel really comfortable with it and they get to know it and they learn their part and they do it really well. Now, I will tell you that some of my students who have autism do not show up to the programs, and I understand that. And it could maybe not be for the reason that the student doesn't want to be overwhelmed. It could be that the parents have to work or can't get away or some other situation. But in some cases, they will not show up because of sensory overload, because you can imagine if there's a full audience plus all the things that are going on the stage. But we do practice a lot so that they know coming on and off the stage and where to stand and all that sort of stuff. I try to take out all the factors, the unknown factors, as much as I possibly can. But so getting back to playing. So in just a regular classroom setting, if you have a student who is willing to participate and play that tambourine throughout the entire pattern, or the sticks throughout the entire pattern, or even if they're making up their own pattern, if they are participating in playing their instrument, and they're feeling that beat to the music, that is a win, okay? So that would be, on an assessment level, that would be like, I caught them, playing, okay? So it's when they're not playing or when they refuse to play that the assessment level would go down more, all right? So if they are playing the instrument perfectly, exactly on that pattern, oh my gosh, obviously that would be an A. If they're playing the instrument at all, but doing their own pattern, or playing the entire pattern, but just with one instrument the entire way, that would be a B. Do you see where I'm going with this? And then a C would be that they're playing it part-time, like maybe they played it once, but didn't play it another time, and then it just continues to go down from there, okay? But I try to give my students many opportunities to play. And if they don't want to play exactly the day that I'm assessing them on that, maybe I won't put an assessment down for them for playing that day, and I'll wait until the next week to see if I can get them to play an instrument for me and assess them on playing at that time. You really don't want to fail your students who have disabilities just because they do not want to do the activity that you ask them to do on that particular day, because you just don't know what's going on with them. And they need extra modification of your expectations in that respect, okay? So we're gonna stop looking at that. So when it comes to singing, you're gonna have students who cannot vocalize. You're gonna have students who do vocalize, but the words aren't very clear. You're gonna have students who just don't like to sing. So I give them many opportunities. Sometimes I'll go stand near them and I'll just see if, they can hum one note with me. Okay, I got them to sing. Okay, once again, a lot of leeway in assessment with students with autism and students with other disabilities, okay? When it comes to choreography, are they moving at all to that music? If they're matching my choreography, fantastic. If my choreography is something like this, and they want to just bounce instead or do this instead, I am okay with that, because that is movement and that's what I'm looking for, all right? So I will tell you, when I do listening, now I would do this with pictures, let's say a picture of a trumpet and a picture of a drum or something, I don't know. But I would go up to them with like 2 choices of something if I'm trying to get them to listen for an instrument, and say, can you point to the one that you heard? Okay? Whereas a general education student, I might say, can you name an instrument that you heard in the song? Because I'm looking to see if they can name anything they heard in the song. Whereas a student who has autism, I'm going to walk up to them and I'm going to say, here's 2 choices. Can you point to the one that you heard, right? But I would do this with pictures. I just don't happen to have my instrument pictures here. They're hung up on the wall in my classroom. Another thing that will help you out to be able to assess your students who are coming from a self-contained classroom is to ask the paraprofessionals that come with them to let you know, did you hear them sing that song? Did you see them play that instrument? Because sometimes you don't have your eyes on them if you're looking at somewhere else in the room or you're changing up something. You don't always catch, because maybe that student only hummed like 1 line of the song, or maybe they only played their sticks for like 1 measure. You want to be able to catch any of that and to be able to count that towards participation and actually being on track and doing what they're supposed to be doing in your classroom. All right, back to the rest of the other video. So I want to tell you a story about a wonderful tool that I discovered when I was working on my master's degree, and it came along at just the right time. It was my very first year of teaching students with autism, and I had this class that came in, and this one girl loved the tambourine. And I keep my instruments in a basket underneath their chairs. And every time she sat down, of course there was a tambourine in the basket, she would immediately, right at the beginning of class, reach for that tambourine and start playing it. And I would have to tell her, remind her, go ahead and put that tambourine down. We are going to play it later, but not right now. Right now we're going to sing, or right now we're going to listen or dance, or whatever this actual activity was. This was very hard for her. She did not have the ability to let that stay in there with me just telling her we're going to get to it later. So it became a real problem with me having to remind her to put the tambourine away, with the paraprofessional reminding her to wait. They would have to move the basket out of her way. We got to the point where it was like, just don't have a basket under a chair, but then she would notice that. It was a very big problem that I couldn't figure out. And then I was in this class where we were talking about different things for special education, and they mentioned a visual schedule. So I'm going to show you what that looks like right here, and I'm going to talk you through it. So a visual schedule is a bunch of pictures of different activities that are going to be done in the order that they're going to be done. And this helps students that have autism. It helps students that have severe and profound disabilities. It helps students in general that just need to have that idea of where they're going. So if you look at this visual schedule that I have here, I don't actually use these pictures. These are Bitmoji pictures that I just happen to throw up here because it is summertime and I do not happen to have my lesson plan icons here to be able to show you what they are. But basically, in the front of my classroom, I have a piano, and on the piano, I put 2 Velcro pieces and a big piece of construction paper, and it says lesson plan on it, and there's Velcro pieces there. And the pictures attach and remove as they're done. So the idea being, here's the order of what we're doing today: listening, singing, dancing, and playing instruments. And when we're done with an activity, that particular, I'm just gonna delete it, that particular picture gets moved. So being that it's Velcro, it just gets moved. I'm just moving that back over so you get the idea. So the students can see, okay, we already did that activity, this is the next one, and so on and so forth. This idea, when I started using it, worked immediately with my friend that loved to play the tambourine. She got it because she would come into class and I would tell her, okay, I want you to look. We're going to do, let's see if I can undo. We're going to do listening first, then we're going to do singing, then we're going to dance, and look what that is. That's an instrument. That's where we're going to play your tambourine, right? So as soon as she saw that, immediately she didn't reach for that tambourine because she knew it was coming and she knew when it was coming. The other thing that I never realized was going to happen is my general education students. They loved this idea. They knew what we were doing throughout the class time, what order it was. They would come in and they would look for that lesson plan right away to see what we were going to do that day. And if I had something up there that had a question mark on it, which I do have one that's got a question mark with actually a smiley face kind of going like this and a bunch of question marks coming out of it. And the students always know that that's going to be something new or something we don't do very often. So I'll put that up there like the first day we're getting ready to work on a program and I want to make that announcement that we're going to start working on a program, or we're going to switch from doing rhythm instruments to melody instruments or something, or any other thing that's special that we don't normally do. I'll put that up there. And the students just love this whole thing, this visual schedule. So it's very easy to create. You just go find images that you want to use from Google, or if you want to do Bitmoji or whatever you want to use, and you just print them out on cardstock, cut them out, laminate them, get yourself a piece of construction paper, laminate that, put Velcro on all of it, hang it up somewhere, remove it, put it back up in any order that you want to do for your classes. And I'll tell you what's happened also is a lot of times my students who have autism, they want to be the one that goes over to take the picture off and put it away. It's kind of like a little routine that helps them to feel like they're managing what's happening in the classroom and keeps them engaged to know what's coming next. So depending on whether or not you want a student to do that or not is up to you. Sometimes my students who have autism will just go over there and do it without asking anybody. And I am personally okay with that, but different teachers may not be. So now I want to talk to you about students who have physical disabilities. Specifically when it comes to playing instruments, I want to show you some things that will help out your students who have physical disabilities. So I'm going to show you this website. There are many of them out there, but this is one that I happen to be aware of called Music is Elementary. And this is their, can't remember what I typed in, music therapy. I look for their music therapy topic. And you can see that they have all of these different assistive placements for instruments so that students can still play an instrument even if they don't physically have the ability to play it in the normal way. So you can just see, for example, here that you've got a mount for a kabasa, a cymbal mount, a drum mount, a jingle mount, okay? All of these things help out students who have physical disabilities. So I want to tell you about a time in my life that changed my perspective on teaching music more than any other time in my entire career. And that is the 6 years that I had the opportunity and privilege to teach at a residential school. This school was a home for students with severe and profound disabilities, and they lived there. There were nurses on staff round the clock. They had classrooms that they would go to in the daytime with teachers and paraprofessionals in there as well to assist them throughout the day. The majority of these students were non-ambulatory, meaning they couldn't walk. The majority of these students were non-verbal. They could vocalize but wouldn't necessarily speak. And the majority of these students had more than one disability going on. I learned patience. I learned to slow down. I learned to look and listen because each child had a different way to say yes or no. And I learned that it was not about teaching them what a quarter note was or getting them to play a rhythm pattern correctly on an instrument, but it was about a music experience. For example, some of my lessons, I would go in there and I would say, we're going to do a lesson about colors today. And I would find maybe 5 or 6 or 7, however many songs about different colors, pink, green, blue. And I would put it on a wheel that spins, and you push a button and the wheel spins around and it lands on whatever color it lands on, and you say pink. Okay, let's do our song about pink. And I can't remember, but it might have been Pink Panther at the time. Or I might do the same idea with weather. We're going to do a song about snow or rainbows or rain or sunshine. I would also do some music related things. For example, I did a whole section that took me 2 or 3 class times to get through. Might have been actually 4, might have been a whole month, about different styles of music. And we were looking for the students. I would play, let's say, marching band music, and we were looking to see if the students liked it or didn't like it. So I would ask the students to tell me yes or no, and there were teachers in the room the entire time, and they're looking at the different students, and they knew the different yeses and nos, which might be an eye blink, it might be a vocalization, it might be a turn of the head, it might be a movement of a hand. Each student had their own way of letting you know yes or no. And the teachers would help me out and say, yep, he really liked marching band. No, he did not. And by the end of this particular series of styles, where I did everything from marching band to opera, I was able to give the teachers a compilation of what styles the students liked. And that way the teachers who had access to music for the students to listen to during free time, or might have access to the parents or caregivers information to be able to say, we discovered that so-and-so really likes jazz. So if you want to get them some jazz music, here's a good idea. And that was a really fun experience. I did another session that took about a month where I went through the different families of the orchestra, and we listened to like the violin and whatnot, and they saw pictures of it and got to hear what it sounded like, etc. Probably my most fun experience with them was there was this software that the assistive technology person, that's the person who was in charge of all the technology that the students use for educational purposes, such as electronic pads or switches or any of those things. She found this software that was improvisation, where you would push a button and the vocalist would be like da da da, and the vocalist would do that every time, but the student would get to choose how many times they wanted the vocalist to do that. Or a saxophone would be playing, or a trumpet or drums, and the students would decide how many times they wanted to do that. So it was kind of like creating our own little composition, and I did do recordings of that and was able to give it to them so that they could hear what they did and what the other classes did, and that was a super fun project. So let me sum up my thoughts on special education. You will have students come to your classroom who have special needs. A lot of times, especially if they're from a self-contained class, they will come with a paraprofessional. That paraprofessional knows those students, they know how to interact with them, they will help you with those students having your music experience by copying what you're doing in the classroom. You may not be able to cater to each one of these students' needs because of the fact that you will probably have a general education class in there at the same time. That is okay. But if you do get the opportunity to learn that this particular student really likes the tambourine, say for example, maybe you make a special effort to have the tambourine available for that student to play when it's time to play instruments. Maybe you make a visual schedule so the students really know where they're going and they have that ability to wait to see what's next. And the paraprofessional can use that visual schedule to redirect their students if they're really wanting to get to that favorite activity of theirs, but it's 2 or 3 activities down the line. So that would be a good idea for you to have as a visual schedule. If you ever have the opportunity to work with students who are severely and profoundly disabled in a residential school setting, I highly recommend it. But you need to lower your musical education expectations. You need to go in there as if you are doing a music experience, almost like a music therapy idea, where you are coming in to bring the joy of music to those students. And trust me, they will teach you far more about life than you ever will about music. All right, that's all I have for today. I hope you learned some tips and tricks for teaching special education, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, bye.